afternoon, Brandy. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm a little soggy down here in Southern California, but we're hanging in
All right. Soggy's probably better than dry.
there. Yeah, I suppose you're right. We do need the rain. Um, Anyways, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us some of your background?
Awesome. So my name is Brandy Hall, and I am the founder and CEO of Shades of Green Permaculture. We are a regenerative landscaping, design, install, maintenance, and education firm. Uh, Oops, sorry. I thought I had. Ooh, sorry, y'all. So we're back to it. We are a regenerative landscaping design, install, education, maintenance firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. So I started the company about 17 years ago in 2008. And it's grown now to about 30 or 32 full-time employees across departments. So we've really just been studying how to apply permaculture and regenerative landscaping within the urban and suburban context for the better part of 2 decades.
That is fantastic. Congratulations. So, did you
Thanks.
study this in college or something, or what inspired you to do it?
That's a great question. No, I didn't study it in college. In college, I did English literature with a focus on children's literature, and then I did my master's in contemplative education. I like to think both of those kind of weave into painting a beautiful picture and telling a story to clients. But Um, if we go further back, I grew up, my mom and my stepdad were in the nursery business in South Florida, growing ornamental plants um, conventionally. And my dad and that whole side of my family is in Western North Carolina. So I grew up kind of going between both places in this very um, dichotomous kind of existence. In Western North Carolina, spending summers drinking from springs and swimming in crystal clear mountain waters and playing in the forest and, surrounded by just beautiful temperate climate rainforest. And then during the rest of the time, I would be in South Florida on the farm, surrounded by ag land, like canals draining, literally draining Florida because it's a giant swamp, especially the southern part. Um, so canals, that were just kind of cesspools with all kinds of herbicides and pesticides and sludge from farm runoff running through them. My parents developed pretty early on in their nursery business pretty intense uh, chemical sensitivities to the herbicides and pesticides that they were using. So they were wearing these suits at the time that are protective suits, but when they would get wet from the inside from sweat, it's 100 degrees, 100% humidity, they're in the hot houses. It would turn into more of like a semi-permeable membrane. So you would trap the chemicals against their skin. So they went from like 0 to 100 in terms of sensitivity really quickly. And then at some point, my mom had a really severe reaction. I was in the car with her, and she had made a delivery at a nursery previously because my stepdad was incapacitated at the time. He was in a wheelchair and he was having nosebleeds that wouldn't stop, and his joints were swollen, and he was getting them drained regularly. And um, as a result of just really intense exposure. And then my mom had taken over the company business. So she went to they came to pick me up at school. And then on the way to the hospital, she was starting to have a reaction from doing a delivery and smelling what had just been sprayed. Um, she started going into anaphylactic shock and shook the panel of the car door off of the inside of the car. Her hands were drawing up and she was choking on her tongue. And um, pretty quickly from that point, they abandoned the nursery business and um, we moved, they went through a series of like a 7 or 8 year detox at that point, going all organic and kind of swinging the pendulum the total opposite way. So that's all to go back to just my background. I grew up in this kind of intense juxtaposition between, beautiful natural world and the havoc we can wreak on ecosystems, in the more human centric kind of world that we live in, which started a really early inquiry. So then, as I was going through college and post college, I dove into the study of permaculture and fell in love because it's really an umbrella that ties together so many aspects of human culture and agriculture and food and medicine and energy and all of the things that allow us to live regenerative lives. So
Wow, that's crazy story, man. I'm sorry that your parents or your stepdad and your mom had to go through that, but sounds like they're all right. They came out the other end. Okay,
yeah, they're good now. Just no intense cleaning chemicals in the house, but otherwise they're good.
because that could have gone a lot worse. You know that. I mean,
Yeah,
getting to that point in your body where it's shutting down and freaking out. I mean, they're very lucky to have survived that in so many ways.
yeah, yeah.
And
And as
no,
you can imagine, it painted a picture of like, wow, we're doing, there's like two ways that we're doing this early on that sort of, I think, shaped a lot of the work to come.
clearly, and that makes a lot of sense why you strayed into permaculture because of what the drastically different scenarios you witnessed as a child growing up. So
Mhm.
kudos to you. I mean, God, in 2009 and 10, when I started talking about soil biology, people thought I had three heads. And so
Right.
I'm sure you experienced some of that as well. It's like, well, why would I need to do permaculture? Well,
Yeah.
what's it all about? And so how did you make your first client sale? I mean, that must have been quite a challenge.
At the time I was teaching, I was the site and education director for a nonprofit, and it was a permaculture demonstration site. And I was teaching classes, and I had a client who was like, this is so theory heavy. Can you come help me design my farm? I'm not exactly sure what to do. And so that was the genesis of it. I was like, well, yeah, absolutely, I can. And then I realized really quickly that, living on a $4 a day food budget, working for a nonprofit versus working for clients and helping them actually transform their spaces was kind of a different direction. Um, yeah, and I think you're onto something. The legacy that permaculture had, especially in Georgia where I am, I think people associated it with like, oh, you have to eat roadkill and build everything out of pallets in order to be doing real permaculture, which doesn't really land in a city. That's kind of counter to the urban existence. So, um, yeah, I think even just from the very beginning, moving from Asheville, where it's a very DIY economy, it's very tourism based at the time, that's 20 years ago, but, um, people they were more like on board. Like, of course you can grow food. But when I came to Atlanta, the idea of like being able to grow blueberries in your own yard was just like mind blowing, which was kind of awesome. It meant there was a lot of opportunity to help kind of open the horizons.
So is Asheville where you spent the other half of your time?
Yeah, a little further west, Cherokee County, North Carolina, which is it's kind of like the armpit of the state. Yeah.
Asheville's beautiful. I spent a little time there a few years back. I have another buddy
Mhm.
that lives there, and all actually two good to deal. Not surprised that you. Uh-oh, Ken.
Well, you just keep breaking up, Leighton. Brandy, are you hearing that as well, or is that just on my end?
I am a little bit. There was a little bit of a lag for a second. It seems to have caught up maybe, but I'm not sure.
Okay, Leighton, you might want to jump off and jump back on and see if that clears up for us.
All right, sounds good.
So, Brandy, you
Okay.
had like an amazing experience growing up, and it really has taken you to a different level. Are you seeing similar things happening even now in that industry, or is that something that's been changing over time?
Yeah, I would say, in the landscaping industry, I think it's very conventional still. by and large, like it's very common to spray for mosquitoes, for instance. That's a pest that we have quite an abundance of here in Atlanta. But I think there is a growing awareness, we did a study recently of just the broader market for us and realized that people really connect with the intention of preserving biodiversity for the sake of helping pollinator populations. And that's just a really interesting thing, because I think the market kind of starts to drive the direction of landscaping, and the industry standards. And I think there's a movement, away from all gas powered, lawn care equipment, for instance. There have been some noise ordinances that have been passed in the last couple years in the Atlanta area, and there's a move toward, electric equipment, for sure. So I think there are some standards within the broader conventional landscaping industry that are being challenged by the market, I think, by what people are wanting as we have more, education. Definitely.
And first of all, how's this? Am I better now?
Yes,
Okay,
I can
good.
hear you.
Yeah, I checked my internet. It's fine. So it must have just been something weird that was going on. But
Always
yeah.
happens.
So backing it up, like the what I've noticed too is that, yeah, these other forces seem to drive the awareness to the causes that we're talking about. Whereas if you were just say there was no enforcement, then or new laws that pass against, whether it's noise reduction or reduction in NPK, without those kinds of forces, it's a lot harder to get a foothold.
Mhm.
Originally, after I graduated, that's the term I use, from Rodale, I built a 180-gallon yogurt maker to make compost extracts on scale, and I built it right on the side of in an industrial building, an old brick mill that had access to the main road, like within 20 feet, 30 feet, and there was a place for trucks to pull up, and I could fill them up, right? Like I had a little gas station set up there, and I was giving the product away to try to get people to see the difference of what this compost extract could do on their properties, and everybody loved it. But when it came time to actually paying for it was like, we're going to go back to what we used to do. And it was really heartbreaking because, and again, I was like giving it to them, demonstrating repeatedly over and over again about how this is so much more beneficial. But the real kicker was they didn't know how to observe. Like you as a permaculturist totally get the understanding of, well, yeah, you need to kind of observe like the high spots, the water flow, which ecotones, which are where different plants are, versus like this neighbor has this kind of soil, this neighbor has that kind of soil, and therefore their weeds or indicator plants will be different based on
Mhm.
soil type. And that observation is critical, to getting people to see what you see, and that's always been the only way that I could get people to like really appreciate the work was. And I've used
Mhm.
this scenario a million times, but I'm gonna use it again. I had a client in Connecticut. It was all 100% NPK, and her husband did all the landscaping himself. And was really struggling. Like he was losing trees and losing grass areas, and so he pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, can you help me out?" And I'm like, "Sure, but you got to promise me you got to stop using the synthetics, because if you use the synthetics after I treat it, you're going to kill all my work and you're never going to see a difference." And so his wife made him promise that he would get rid of all the NPK, so it wasn't even an option. So he cleaned out his little garden shed,
Mhm.
and then we went ahead and started the treatment. And after about a year, actually it might have been a little less, 10 months, I was back at their property in October, and I just stopped by because I was in the neighborhood, and I was out in the driveway just kind of staring at the work. And Jeannie, his wife, saw me, and she came running out, and she goes, "Oh, Leighton, how you doing? What's going on? What are you staring at?" And I said, well, I'm just kind of admiring, how nature came back here so quickly. And she's like, what are you talking about? So I told her, I said, look at your lawn. Just stare at your lawn for a minute. And she goes, whoa, it's moving. Look at all the insects. Look at all the
Look at all
birds.
the insects.
Yeah, right. Look at all the birds. And she's like, wow. And I said, now look at your flowers. Look at how vivid the colors are. And she goes, Leighton, I noticed that they're lasting a lot longer when I cut them and bring them inside. Okay. And I said, now look at that holly tree. Look at how the luster is just like, it looks like a mirrors on it, like you painted clear nail polish over it. And she's like, this is unbelievable. And then she turned and looked at her neighbor's property and her jaw hit the floor. She was like, oh my God, that looks dead. And I'm like, yeah, Jeannie, that's the problem with synthetics, the MPK. Just the plants struggle to just stay alive, and they're sick. Do you see any bugs over there? No. Do you see any birds over there? No. So and the luster of the plants and the color of the flowers were not as vivid and sheeny. And so her neighbor walked out and she started screaming. I'm like, no, Jeannie, no, right? Because you don't want to embarrass her, right?
Right.
Well, shit, the neighbor comes running over. What's the matter? Are you okay? You okay? Jeannie goes, look at my property. Look at all this stuff going on. And then look at yours. And the lady's jaw hit the floor and she basically just walked off in a huff. And a week later, they came in and ripped everything out. All the old landscape, brought in all new plants at an absorbent cost because she was a very wealthy lady. This is a very wealthy area. And she is one of the most expensive landscape architects in the area. So I know it was a fortune. And sure as shit, like within 2 years, it was back to looking crappy, right? And I told Jeannie, look, I'm done here. I did 3 treatments. Technically, as long as you don't go back to synthetics, you're not going to have a problem. And she didn't. They didn't. And I went by there before I left for the West Coast, and it was just thriving. Even the areas where like the grass had started to die back, now it was spreading into the hill. All the trees were healthy again. So we know stuff works, but that's the hard part. Is you have to literally put their face into it and say, just breathe for a minute and look at it. I don't know. Do you have a similar experience?
I'm a big believer in kind of build it and they will come. So I think people can perceive when something is like alive and thriving and buzzing. And, if we stop long enough to actually look, which is maybe a challenge in the city world or in just the modern life that we find ourselves in. But there's something really magical that happens. We have a lot of people that lean into like doing their front yards and just growing as many, pollinator flowers and fruit trees and all the things that they can. There's something really magical about just your neighbor walking by and being like, "Was that an apple? Like, wait a second, you can grow apple here?" And there's, yeah, take some, and then that little kind of gesture spreads, I think. And it has. I mean, I've noticed a huge difference just in the last 15 years around people's awareness and also acceptance, I think, of more natural landscapes, rather than the hyper manicured, it's only for aesthetic purposes kind of landscape that we find in a lot of the suburban and urban world. And then back to your point around like the regulation, it took, when I first moved to Atlanta, it was technically illegal to harvest rainwater, but then pretty quickly municipalities started to catch on that, oh, if we don't let people manage the first inch of rainwater, because in our climate, about 75% of our water falls in an inch rain event or less. So if you're managing the first inch of rainwater on your site, you're managing about 75% of water that falls on your site, which you can imagine the downstream implications of that, because the way our built environment is currently is, the roof drains to gutters, the gutters drain to downspouts, the downspouts drain to sidewalks and driveways that drain to the streets, which drain to the storm drains, which drain to our creeks and our rivers, and eventually out to the sea. And so with it, they're carrying, all of that water is carrying nutrient. It's, we're having these like major flash flood events and then drought. And this kind of continuum is really extreme. But municipalities have caught on, like, oh, if we mandate that homeowners or new construction or, new building permits meet a 1 inch requirement, meaning they infiltrate at least 1 inch of water on their landscape before they allow it to run off, then the downstream like tax implications for needing to, upsize our stormwater infrastructure every 15 years, spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, and then that gets deferred to taxpayers, obviously. There's a lot less disruption, a lot more ecological benefit, a lot less tax on the water supply, the reservoirs and things that we use for irrigation. So I think I think people are catching on, and municipalities started regulating, you know, water specifically maybe a decade ago in our area. And I know in places that are more drought stricken, it's more, they're further along on that curve for sure, than places like Atlanta, where we're blessed with 60 plus inches a year. So, um, we have an abundance of water, but that's often the problem. I think that's why the kind of standard mindset, and I talk about this in my new book, The Complete Guide to Home Permaculture. It's we tend to approach water as a nuisance and want to just kind of get it away from the foundation, just send it away. We'll just turn on the tap and pull in more. And everything that we do is really in our conventional practices around land management is really this linear system, versus permaculture and regeneration and ecological design. They're kind of coming at the same end from different directions, but it's really about creating closed loops. So with the water cycle, let's restore the water cycle by slowing the water down, sinking it in, infiltrating it, allowing it to replenish our groundwater and our aquifers, rather than just sending it away and then bringing in more. And same with our soil, like rather than bagging up our leaves and shipping them to the landfill and then buying dirt from across the country in the spring, or compost from across the country in the spring, let's compost our leaves on site. Let's compost our waste. Let's start tying those nutrients back into the soil. Or there's a number of, methods. And then same with plants, rather than just, picking things that meet only the aesthetic function. We can pick plants that meet many functions within our landscape, whether it's privacy or food or herbal medicine or pollinator habitat or songbird habitat, or, myriad kind of ways that plants can work for us in our landscape. But if we start to do that, then we start to build more resilience, and we start to build some of those closed loops in our site, where we're bringing in pollinators and or beneficial insects that help keep pests in line, and we're pulling up nutrients from the soil with the different rooted plants that we have that then release them into the upper horizons of the soil when their leaves die back. And it just creates this kind of like beauty and abundance that I think is undeniable.
This is just magical. I mean, you would not believe where I live, what I see. Like when I first moved here to Southern California, everybody had 3 bins. One was recycle, one was rubbish, and one was green waste. And I'm like, what is green waste? And they're like, oh, we take all of our plant material, our grass clippings, everything, and we would fill this bin. And I'm like, you're literally stripping your soil of everything. Why are you not chipping? Why is it not a law that you can't use it back? You need to use a mulch blower. Why is it that when you take these branches, you're not required to chip them up and throw them right back underneath the bush or tree that you pruned? And it's almost insanity. So it's so great to hear that your city is like open to these like really simple concepts that are so much more beneficial for everybody. It's exciting. Yeah. It's really exciting to hear that. Like, all right, where did the law say? When did the law pass that you have to sink an inch? That's amazing.
Maybe about 10 years ago, the city of Atlanta passed their green infrastructure guidelines. and then a lot of the municipalities around us started catching on. I mean, it comes down to just common sense, I think, a lot of times. Like you might people, municipalities, people might not get on board because of the, the life honoring aspects of sinking water, or growing pollinator habitat or reducing chemicals or all of those things. But I think when there's like a real tangible financial implication, like having to upsize our stormwater pipes, um, people start to catch on. And also from a maintenance perspective, we have a lot of landscapes that transition to more meadow type landscapes with control, cues to care, they're called in the design world a lot of times, where we might have some formal edging or, hardscaping or something that kind of frames the plants, and that kind of balances it visually so that you can allow for a little bit more wildness. If you think of like the image of like the High Line in Manhattan is a great example of this kind of balance, right? Where you can grow wild pollinators, plants, and native plants, and useful plants, and fruit trees, and all these things. But if it's framed in a more orderly way, it's more legible to the average eye, and therefore it's maybe a little bit more like, quote unquote beautiful or aesthetically pleasing, and people tend to say yes to those. But then on the maintenance side of things, if you're not just having to mow twice a week for, our growing season is like February till early November here in Atlanta. So that's a long amount of mowing and blowing. And I think homeowners, as well as, municipalities and other institutions, have caught on, or are catching on, I should say, that there's a lot more um, cost savings with having a managed meadow than just a useless lawn.
Man, yeah, that the High Line in New York was an amazing project.
Hmm.
I was blessed to be a part of it, a small part, but in the background. And I got to do
Awesome.
so many other projects like that, and we started bringing that stuff back to the suburban parts of Connecticut where I did reside. And I did get people to put in meadows, but then all their neighbors complained. And it was
Mm.
just so sad that, like, can't you get past the nature isn't neat or polished like you want it to be, and instead just let it be. And look at the different flushes of flowers through the different, the from spring to fall is there's a big difference. But
Mhm.
people wouldn't, they would do it for a year, and then they would be sick of hearing all the complaints, and then they come in and till it up and friggin' plant the grass again. And it was like so sad to see, one step forward, two steps back again. So
Mhm.
I'm really impressed that you've somehow gotten people to be a little bit more open minded. Maybe it is that framing of the area. Like there was a couple of very wealthy landscapes that I could help built literally, where we did get a chance to put in meadows. But what they did was they mowed pathways through the meadows so that they could be walking, through the meadow with and have a little bench here for space to reflect,
Mhm.
which they never did. But needless to say, I think that helped a lot. But these were more, very high end estates where people didn't have access to them, and they were generally behind walls or fences.
Mhm.
So it was more of a personal taste versus you drive down the road, lawn, unruly
Mhm.
lawn.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us some of the tricks that you've gotten people to be a little bit more open minded to these rather unruly, beautiful meadows.
Yeah. So I think a lot comes around education, and just like I really believe that people want to do good. I think they really want to tend the earth well or leave something for their children. A lot of people. And so it's sometimes just a matter of not knowing exactly where to start, more than not wanting to do it, or even like not understanding the implications of the choices that they're making in their landscape and connecting those to some of our larger global issues that we face. For instance, like those high-end clients you're describing, they might go to Whole Foods and buy all organic food, but not realize that the things that they're spraying on their lawn to, keep the mosquitoes away are actively undermining the other choices that they're trying to make by supporting organic agriculture. So I think a lot of times it's really just a matter of education. And with permaculture, one of the things that I think has been a challenge and an opportunity is it is a very, if you go on YouTube and you read about permaculture, it's very complex and very theory heavy. And I think a lot of people kind of dip their toe in and then say, oh, I can't do this. It's like, I'm not going to be growing all my own food, so therefore I can't, do permaculture. I put that in quotes. Or I'm not exactly sure where to start. And so when I wrote the book, the book, it's on pre-order right now. It comes out in late January, I think January 20th. But it's based on the experience of working with clients for, the 15 years prior, of really wanting to know, like, how do I actually, and students, how do I actually implement, permaculture in an urban or suburban kind of setting where I'm not going to be growing all of my own food. I'm not going to live on 100 acres and completely off grid and, just in some sort of like vacuum. I think the UN says that by the year 2050, 68% of people will live in urban centers. So then the question is really like, okay, for the other, if you're not in that 32% who live rurally, and you're in that 68%, how do you actually interact with your land as a steward if that's your desire, right? How do you make positive environmental impact if you live in the non-rural context? So the Complete Guide to Home Permaculture is really about understanding the macrocosm issues that we face, like drought and aquifer depletion and broken water cycles, right? Or soil loss and the loss of biodiversity, the implications of spraying. When you spray your lawn, and I'm in the watershed that ends up going out toward the Mississippi, right? So me spraying my lawn ends up in waterways that eventually flow to the Mississippi River and then into the Gulf of Mexico. And in the Gulf of Mexico, there's a eutrophication zone, a dead zone that's, 15 years ago was the size of Connecticut. It's, clearly larger than that now. So to be able to connect our choices to the larger impacts that we see, I think is really an important kind of thread for folks. And then how do we make the decisions that are applicable to my lifestyle and my landscape? And, you're not doing permaculture just because you dig a swale. In fact, swales are not always the right option. It totally depends on your water, and the situation you have. So if you have a ton of water and you're prone to flooding, sinking it in is not necessarily what you're wanting to do, but learning the techniques to tie the choices that we make back to some of the larger issues so that we can become stewards, I think is a really important piece of it. So I broke down, you've got this complex system that is permaculture and it can be unapproachable, but over the years I've simplified it into something that I call the 3 pillars of a regenerative landscape. So it's, working with water as a resource to restore the water cycle and rehydrate our soils, to build our soils capacity to hold water and cycle nutrients on our sites so we're not losing those valuable resources. And then the third is to build biodiversity through building plant communities rather than thinking of just individual plants. How are all the plants in my landscape working together as an ecosystem that meet multiple functions, whether it's to feed myself or, the pollinators or songbirds or, all of the above. And I think, the techniques that we use within any of those pillars, when we're talking about water, maybe a contour swale is the right option, maybe a cistern's the right option, maybe a dry creek bed is a better option to achieve your goal, or maybe it's some combination therein, or a rain garden. For soil, maybe you have a ton of leaves and that's how you work in replenishing your soil, or maybe you you know, you have like a very bacteria rich type of soil plant community that you need to support, and you have worm castings or you compost or all of the above, right? And then with plants, like maybe you grow, you know, maybe you want to have a lawn, and you know that's not like the demon word, you know, you can have, but how can you have a lawn and also support pollinators and build your soil microbiome and grow medicine? You know, you can achieve that even in a mowable meadow kind of situation. So um I think how people implement uh these techniques, you know, all of them tie back to the three pillars. And then if you're doing those three things in any landscape, you're stewarding the land well, you know, you're creating healthy and vibrant ecosystems that have impact beyond just the aesthetic value that we tend to place on landscapes. That was a
And
whole soapbox. Sorry.
no, I think you cracked the shell of permaculture because, and please don't take this personal, but when I first went down the biological path, you know, of course, I was drawn to permaculture. I mean, why wouldn't you be? And what I found was just like this hardline community of, oh, you gotta
Mhm.
worship this and you gotta do this, and it was like, well, wait a minute. I mean, like if you look at the whole picture, there's a lot of different ways to take bits and pieces of this without trying to, you know, go out of your mind and spend a year studying every raindrop that hits the soil. And I just got like kind of turned off that you know these guys were out of control, and it bummed me out because I was like, oh my god, when I found it I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. And it was like I figured that stuff out like way earlier on before I dove down the biological wormhole. I was doing development, and I was wanted to do a development on this old paint factory that had you know all kinds of polluted soil. You know, it was all fenced off all the way around, and you know
Mhm.
I'd met this guy named John Todd who had created an aquatic system to filter you know, whether it's human sewage or runoff that was poisoned, and he used a series of tanks, and everything was gravity fed. You know, it went through different plant cycles, different. You know, it ended up in a fish tank, and that was the way he, you know, made sure that he is cleaning the water to the level he needed to, because fish are super sensitive to these kinds of toxins in their environment. And I was just like, oh my God, this guy is amazing. And then he turned me on to this other guy who had traveled the world um, studying these toxic waste sites. And he would
Mhm.
collect the plants and the biology from those sites and ship it back to his home. And he created an entire library of these cytoremediators and the biological constituents that work with the plants to remediate the soil because they were living there, right? If only a plant
Mhm.
and biology that's strong enough to be using that toxin as a food instead of as a poison. And again, this was like, oh my God. And then I stumbled into alternative energy sources and like, you know,
Mhm.
I don't know if trom wall makes any sense to you, or greenhouses connected to your house. And that led to garbage wars, which was these guys building these earth ships down in Arizona. And so it just all came full cycle from everything I was, you know, looking when I was a kid to getting into the developing world. And so, you know, that's when I got through Rodale is when I really reached out to permaculturists. It was like, look, I had this great product and you can make it yourself if I teach you to do it. And it was like, oh no, that takes care of itself. And I'm like, well, yeah, it does eventually over years, but this is the way to speed it up really quickly. And also, you know, even if you're in a, you know, a fringe environment where you're not doing a full permaculture, at least they can be doing something that's like along the principles and understandings of permaculture. And so that was, you know, that was my frustration. And I was glad to see you kind of nod your head because you know what I'm talking about is that
Mhm.
we need to be more open minded about, you know, taking
Mhm.
pieces of it or I think people use the term listen to everybody, take away what matters to you or what means to you.
Mhm.
And so again, the three pillars is like a brilliant way to get people to start without being overwhelmed. And
Mhm.
I would love to hear if you've had any reaction from other purists or enthusiasts about permaculture in your approach.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying about sort of the dogma of things, especially in the world of permaculture, that's something that is a really big, puts like a weird taste in my mouth and has from the very beginning. I think, in the world of like lumpers and splitters and biology, I tend to be more of a lumper, like, yes, and like anytime I smell, evangelizing, I have an allergic reaction. So I think that definitely infuses my approach to permaculture. And I've had some conversations of like, how is this different? In the book, I talk about this in the introduction a little bit, that I use the term permaculture interchangeably with regenerative landscaping and ecological landscaping. And I see those as sort of like three threads that all lead to the same objective, and that's really what the three pillars are about too, is like permaculture is not just like a series of techniques, right? Oh, you're only doing permaculture if you've built an herb spiral or you've dug a contour swale or you've planted a fruit tree with, 1,000 plants around the base of it. That is not what makes permaculture in my view. And it's not what makes regenerative agriculture either, as a slew of techniques, or ecological landscaping as a slew of techniques. I think it's really the objectives that drive the work, and those are the three pillars in my view. It's the objectives of really restoring the water cycle and working with water, in a way that views it as a resource that replenishes and rehydrates our soils and our aquifers. It's really about building soil on our site with the resources that we have so that we don't need chemical inputs, right? And it's about building plant communities that look at the full ecology of a site. And when you think about, permaculture's objective typically, or the kind of the inroad, I would say, is really around growing all of your own, growing a lot of food. It's the portmanteau of the word permanent and agriculture. So how can we create permanent agriculture systems that we don't have to, you know, rebuild year after year, like an annual system? But I say even within that, like, yes, and like, yeah, we can have plant communities that have an objective of feeding us, growing fruit trees and growing herbs and growing perennial vegetables and edible flowers and all of those things. That is wonderful. And they can do, our landscape choices can do more than that also. And I would say regenerative landscaping or regenerative agriculture, the objective there is about, creating something that's continuing to build its health rather than need inputs to sustain its health, right? So nutrients are cycling back in, plant materials cycling back in, all of these things, it's interwoven within the ecosystem of production. So you can think of like agroforestry systems that have, fruit trees and berries and pollinator attracting and supporting plants at the base of them, interwoven with our, more standard production fields. And then ecological landscaping, a lot of people that get into ecological landscaping are really coming at it from a perspective of, let's restore biodiversity, let's support biodiversity, let's, grow native plants, native plants, native plants. And I think that there's a world where it's like, it's yes, and it's to all of those things. Let's grow food, let's support, pollinators and biodiversity, and let's regenerate the health of the site through the landscaping choices that we're making.
Oh man, once again, you nailed it because people are so campy, right? They get into this
Yeah.
camp and then it's like, right? So like I believe me, like I'm all about native plants. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. But yes, and like you said, like what about a fruit tree too? Let's make
Mhm.
it, let's do the three sisters underneath your freaking apple tree, right? There's no reason you can't just have a little area dedicated to some of these other aspects. So what your clients are on like 1 acre lots or quarter acre lots or?
It totally depends. We've had clients where they have a rooftop, and we're doing all of our growing in planters. And we've worked with schools that have done that. We've worked with apartment complexes that have done that, all the way through like 1,000-acre farms, so it kind of runs the gamut. But I would say the bulk of our clients are in town Atlanta, probably by revenue, 75% of our clients are residential. So they're single point decision makers, and most are on, like my house is 6,000 square foot acre or 6,000 square foot land, not house. My house is
Yeah.
like 800 square feet. So what's that, like a eighth of an acre or so?
Yep.
Yeah. So all the way, I would say in town, the biggest lots that we really work with are probably 2 acres, but most are somewhere around a half acre.
Mhm. But that's enough, right? See,
Oh,
that's
it's
the other,
plenty.
right? That's the other thing that people say is, oh, I only have a quarter acre. I can't do this stuff. And it's like, no, you've got
Right.
plenty of room to do this stuff. Like you can compost it in a cylinder.
In
You don't need to
yeah,
make
you need a bucket.
yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need a pallet pile.
Yeah, totally. It doesn't need to stink.
Yeah,
Yeah, funny
yeah.
story. I used to, I come from living in the country where I had a pallet pile and that was no problem at all. It was like far enough away. I didn't really think about it, from smell or whatever. Um, and then when I moved to the city, I had a pallet pile. And pretty quickly, my neighbor's catty corner, the house sold. It hadn't been lived in like 15 years. It got renovated. All the rats that had holed up there decided to move out and move into my open compost pile. And then they got into my seeds in my garage. And then they got into the ceiling of my garage. And it was just this like mayhem. And after that, I was like, oh, the tumbler kind of makes sense in the city. I get it, so now I have a steel tumbler that I just, rotate until it's finished enough that it's not really stinky or, attracting rodents, and then I dump it out and finish it on the ground. But yeah, you learn as you go. Oh, there's some
Yep.
reason for this.
Oh, too funny. Yeah, we as a species only learn from we learn our lessons from our mistakes, not from our successes. And it's kind of
It's true. It's true.
that's
Thank
how you
goodness.
remember them, though, right? You don't
It
make
is.
the mistake. You don't make the same mistake twice when you go through the consequences of realizing that, hey, I probably should have thought that through a little bit better.
Yeah, totally. Well, won't
So
do that again. That's what my dad
right,
says.
right. So one of the other things that a great trick for these smaller areas is I would tell people, I'd just say, hey, take your post hole digger, dig a pit as go as deep as you can, and then throw your food scraps in there at the end of the day, throw a little bit of soil on top of it, and put a trash can lid with a brick on it. And then what will happen is over the course of 6 months to a year, every time you put something in there, it'll go down and down and down, and eventually you'll end up with this incredible column of worm castings that then you plant a tree in. So you kind of strategically place your underground food composting, where you think you're going to do something in the future. And the people that did do this, like in Connecticut and stuff, were like, why didn't we think of this? And I'm like, well, come on, guys. When you were young kid and you were, out in your lake house or whatever, or your camp, you had an outhouse, right? And you had this little bin next to the kitchen where you step on the lid and throw the food scraps from the end of the day, because we didn't have garbage disposals. We didn't have food waste processing systems or sewers that could take, grind it up and shoot it down the sewer, what is it, flush and forget. And so it was just a matter of waking them up. And when they started to think about it, they're like, oh man, this is what I'm going to do from now on. And it works so darn well, because when you plant into those worm castings, whatever you plant, I don't care if it's a shrub or a tree, it's just going to explode with life. And then you don't have the pests.
Right. Yeah, that's a great technique for
Yeah,
prepping the soil.
yeah, keep that in mind for your clients. And the,
Yeah.
and the basket, which is just basically 6 by 6 wire, and then you wrap the inside with some kind of wire mesh, and that's for all your plants. So all your
Hmm.
trimmings, your grass clippings, or pruning, whatever, shred it, chip it, throw it in there, and then literally,
Hmm.
by the end of the season, which I know your season is a lot longer than where we were. We were a 6 month season.
Hmm.
By the next season, you'd have this incredible, again, super biologically rich compost, and not a
Hmm.
lot of it, right? Because it would just reduce every time you added to it. You may have to do like multiple rings, but they're so small.
Hmm.
Tuck them off into the corners, or
Hmm.
the bush, somewhere where it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, except for your employees. They know it's there and know what it's for. But I loved trying to get people to do that. Like out here, like everybody lives in these. I call them. I hate to say it, jail cells. Like literally, the fence between.
Concrete bunkers.
Yeah, literally, right. And I have like I can spit out my front door and hit my neighbor's house. It's like 5 feet, a 6 foot high fence, another 5 feet to his property. So
Wow.
there's literally no room. But again, you can still do these kinds of things even in these tiny little lots. And
Hmm.
I've been looking for a beach oak for 6 months now because I can't get a really big one, but I want to get one that's big enough that provides a little shade so that I can start to grow some of these other plants around it. Because I live in a dunes, literally dunes.
Hmm.
Like, I'm surrounded by sand dunes. Beautiful ecology, but not really suitable for kind of a more uh, permaculture feel to it. Like I can grow succulents.
Hmm.
There's succulents everywhere, right? And I love succulents. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want to just grow succulents. I want to have some other plants. I want some flowers. Like when I first moved into the other house about 5+ years ago, there was this like sandbox in one corner where they had like when they did all the excavation, they kind of piled the sand up in one corner, and then they took the concrete cutting from the what we call curb cuts, and they just kind of randomly stacked it so that it built a retaining wall so that they could pile the sand behind it. And what I do is I went and got a yard of compost in my car. I have a Toyota Highlander, so I wrapped the tarp,
Uh-huh.
shoveled in, and filled it with crappy commercial compost. Came back, tilled it into the sand, and then I spread these indigenous wildflowers. And man, within a year, that friggin' garden was just, like I said, alive. Like I'd never seen
Hmm.
we don't have insects down here because I'm surrounded by strawberry fields. So they're nuking that thing with fungicides and all kinds of crap all year
Hmm.
round. So like there were no birds, hummingbirds, yes, but no songbirds, and
Hmm.
no bugs other than we have spiders, male mosquitoes, and the little hunter flies that kind of
Hmm.
have those two. We have them, and that's about it. Well, when that garden really started to grow, I had probably 5 different types of indigenous bees.
Hmm.
Beautiful little guys, gorgeous and harmless. Like I could go up there and touch them, and they wouldn't sting me. They would climb on my hand. Tons of
Hmm.
butterflies, and then all of a sudden the songbirds started to come in, and so it was gorgeous. And now I moved to another place that's even smaller. Unfortunately, my landlady sold the house, and basically
Hmm.
the landlord, when they renovated this apartment, ripped out all the succulents and just left bare sand. So I was kind of like, I got to do something with it, right? But I got to
Yeah.
create a little shade, to get these plants established. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I have not done anything, and I'm starting to get some really cool, like little wildflowers, indigenous
Awesome.
flowers, which is awesome. And again, I don't want to make this a high maintenance landscape. I don't want to have to be out there watering. So I'm just kind of letting it happen, letting it do what it does. Um,
Hmm.
and I still would like a little area that was a little bit more, formal as far as like being able to, again, create some kind of garden and some shaded area in the back. But I don't
Hmm.
know why I went on that tangent, but
It's beautiful, all the different things you can do with a landscape if you just kind of like imagine it, you know? And
right.
then really like low impact, like let me just spread some wildflower seeds and see what happens, and then turns into something beautiful.
Yep,
you know?
agreed, 100%. And you know, you're right. I mean, pretty much everyone should have a small patch of pollinator garden. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way we're going to bring the ecology back. And if we just
Hmm.
continue to ignore the fact that we've reduced insect populations or diversity by like what 60-70%, something crazy now,
Yeah.
that if we don't start providing some, you know, areas dedicated to allowing them to, you know, repopulate to some level, and perhaps even start to evolve or create new species of insects, we're going to be in a lot of trouble in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and kudos to you because you've said pollinator garden I don't know how many times in this podcast, and
Yeah,
it's so important.
it's wild because it's like it's an inroad, I think, too, because everybody loves beautiful flowers, you know? But when you're creating beautiful flower gardens using native plants that attract beneficial insects and, bring in songbirds and all these things, that it starts to jumpstart. It's sort of like a kickstart to the ecology of the landscape, like you were saying. So we include pollinator gardens in all of our designs because having native beautiful flowers is a great thing to do. And there's so many other things that you can add in as well, but I think that's something that a lot of people connect with, and it's not the only tool or the only thing, but um yeah, it's definitely, I think it's an important lever that we can pull in an urban ecosystem where we've lost a lot of habitat. Bringing in animals and insects is kind of the first step in creating a more robust ecology. So
Do you have mockingbirds?
we do. Yeah.
They're amazing.
Not a ton around here, but more like up if you go into the mountains, I see them more. But yeah, they're funny. I used to have one that would just come and poop on my balcony after eating mulberries like all the time. I was just like, damn you, mockingbird.
Quit mocking me.
Quit mocking me with your mulberry stained poop. Oh,
Because we had one that would come and visit until my landlady round up my whole garden.
oh no.
Oh yeah. She called me. I was traveling across country. This was after my partner had passed away, and I was kind of she wanted to use the house for the summer. She'd owned it for 8 years and never got a chance to ever use her summer home. And she asked me if I would, let her use it for a month or two. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll go on a road trip. It'd probably be good for my soul to just get out of here and kind of like, get my head unglued. Um, and so anyway, she texted me while I was just, I don't know, Kentucky or something, and said, hey, this garden's a little unruly. Can I do something with it? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Just have Timo, your landscaper, weed whack it, but weed whack it at about 8 inches high and just let all the green stuff fall down. And the plants will come back and you'll have fed the plants the plant food. And I didn't hear back from her. Well, come to find out when I got back, it was barren soil. Everything was dead. She just sprayed the whole friggin' thing with Roundup.
Oh man.
But because I'm pretty good at what I do, I called a client of mine, Kyle Mood, who's a corn and bean farmer in Illinois, and I said, dude, I want you to go out to the most polluted field and I want you to find clumps of grass for me. And I don't want just the grass. I want the rhizose sheath. I want the whole clump. And he's
Hmm.
like, I don't want to know. And I'm like, that's fine. You don't have to know. He goes, all right, now I got to know. What the hell you do? Why would you want poisons? They go, it's not poison. I go, that plant and the biology have figured out how to survive in Roundup, in D4WD or whatever that,
Hmm.
you know, same as Roundup. It's just a different formula, right? And I said, I'm going to take it and I'm going to make a compost extract out of it. So I took the grass, I tied it in a knot, hung it from a step ladder, put a concrete vibrator in a bucket of water, and then just put the plant in there and just shook the shit out of it until it
Hmm.
was, just bare roots. And then I took that and threw it in my compost pile. And then I took the extract and put it into or sprayed it. I got rid of the sand and the silt and the clay. and just sprayed the extract over the whole little garden area. I did one application of that and then one application of my own extract, and then reseeded it, and it came right back. So, we can use these techniques of harvesting those, plants that live in these toxic environments, and use them to clean up, our sites, or get them ready for transitioning into a regenerative or regenerative landscape or agriculture, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that's another technique that you can put in your field guide on how to do transitioning some of these soils. It definitely speeds up the process tremendously, and that only reflects better on you. Is you plant everything and everything survives, yeah, right. And instead of we lost this plant because obviously there was some heavy use of herbicide at this corner, or for whatever reason it ran off into this area. Yeah, that's another a good trick for you guys to have, especially in the urban and suburban, or excuse me, the suburban and city environment.
Yeah, that's a really great one. There's, we often tell clients, we can do as much planning as we can do, and then sometimes, against all odds, something survives where you don't think it's going to do very well, or something doesn't thrive where you thought it was going to do well, even though all the conditions seem to be the right conditions. And so much of working with the land is just about iterating on the design, and it's okay, well, it's growing here, but sort of struggling a little bit for whatever reason. But if it's doing really well over there, so let me just sort of like move plants around and, adjust and integrate the feedback that the land is giving. And then if you do that over several seasons, you end up having plants that are just really doing great.
Yep, robust and thriving.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a landscape architect firm that I worked for out of Greenwich, Connecticut. Again, very, very high-end projects. And they love to plant inappropriately. So they would take a swamp maple and surround it by European boxwoods, which they would, trim and manicure to create these like topiary type pieces. And they typically had 20% plant loss. And so when they brought me on, I said, well, all right, first of all, I've looked at your plans. No problem. I can build this. But what I'm going to need to do is I'd like to break the irrigation into 2 zones for these types of topiary environments. And like, we already have 300 zones. We can't turn it into 600, right? Like, oh, so you're going to keep them on the same zone? And they're like, oh, yeah, of course we are. And I'm like, well, all right, can I engineer the soil? And they're like, well, what do you mean? Well, I'm going to do 2 different blends. I'm going to do something that drains for the boxwoods and something that holds the moisture for the swamp maple. And they're like, yeah, do whatever you want. So we finished the project, and it was a hell of a piece. As a matter of fact, you can Google Earth it. It's 266 Michigan Ave in New Canaan, Connecticut. And the end of the job, the head architect, landscape architect, came up to me and was like, you had 0 plant loss. And I'm like, yeah. So he's like, well, how did you achieve that? We budget in 20% plant loss and 20% replant into the bid. I'm like, holy cow, can I have 5% of that?
Right.
He looked at me
It's
and
a
said,
lot.
yeah, he said, no, it was over $80,000.
Wow.
The pallet was $860,000. So 20% of that, do the math. It's a lot.
Right.
And then labor too, to come back, rip out, and replant.
Right.
So anyway, he was like, how did you do that? I go, well, all the stuff that you brought in here, I'd set up that temporary nursery. He goes, yeah, I wondered what the heck that was all about. And I go, I would take your plants and I would inject them with a compost extract and detox them before I planted them so that they didn't go through plant stress when we planted them. And he's like, wow, that's a really good idea. I'd never thought of that, and he goes, but I don't like composting because I always get all these weed seeds. And I'm like, well, those aren't weed seeds. Those are indicator plants. They're telling you what's wrong with your compost. Like, you need to add more of this or more of that. to get it to be
Mm.
balanced. And yeah, you should probably cook it when you start to get rid of all the weed seeds. So you're kind of being a little lazy about making a static pile, and that's why and not pulling the plants before they seed out and seed your whole compost pile. So I taught him these tricks, and you know what he when I moved on, uh, they all went back to synthetics again, and it just absolutely broke my heart because the only reason they were allowed to build on those properties was because I assured all these coastal commissions and watershed commissions and save the turtle, save this, save that commissions that no, there would be no synthetics used on these properties, and we would not affect the watershed. And as a matter of fact, we
Mm.
created all of these, like you said, rain gardens. We did do some infiltration stuff on like for the whole parking lot. So we had come up with all these watershed management things because this one was right on a pond, and that pond flowed into the watershed for the state of Connecticut, right? So
Mm.
it was one of those really really high end projects, and and it worked beautifully. Like every time it rained, there was no erosion, there was no puddling, um, no rivers flowing across.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, it was an amazing project, but it broke my heart when I rolled up to do a compost extract because I always built a corner where I put the trimmings. Told the landscape guys, "Hey, save me a little bit
Mhm.
of each of the trimmings and put it into this pile." And then every year I'd go back and make another extract, and just because these high end properties, they want to be perfect, right? They don't want
Mhm.
a bug or a flaw or any kind of plant reaction. Sure And so I roll back up, and first thing I see is a van with the words "organic land care," right? And I'm like, all right, good. They listened to me. And then out comes the back was 5 guys with backpack sprayers. And I'm like, well, what are you guys doing? What do you guys do? Oh, no, hablo inglés, no hablo inglés. Here, call my jefe, call my jefe. So I call their boss, and I'm like, what are these guys spraying here for? And they go, oh, well, we saw some mushrooms. I'm like, the mushrooms are because you're overwatering. And I told you guys not to just crank up the irrigation.
Mm.
You know as well as I do, in these kind of environments, you need half the water that you typically do with an NPK
Mhm.
landscape.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting. We see a lot of plant loss when clients overwater. That's like the number one reason that when we lose plants, which is not that frequently.
yeah, and you're so right. I mean, it's a battle with these irrigation guys because yeah, they're good at putting pipe down and setting up sprinkler heads, but they have no right whatsoever to manage them. Like they should be handed
Mhm.
off to someone like you or me or a plant pathologist, somebody that understands the picture of the
Mhm.
plant and the soil and the relationship they have.
Mhm.
And so anyway, they killed all of my work in one day of applying the fungicide.
Oh man.
And that was like the third one in a row. And after that, I was like, you know what, I'm done. And
Mhm.
I moved into the cannabis space because those people liked their plants.
Yeah.
They loved them.
Really, really tending to them.
Yes, they
Yeah.
really loved their plants. And so
Love it.
that was a good fit until unfortunately that industry collapsed a few years back. But
Mhm.
anyway, onward and upward, right? So
Yep.
other questions like, all right, so typically, uh, does the town or the city take into consideration like the footprint of the building and the parking lot and include that in the sink to 1 inch, or is that something that they're only measuring the soil?
Yeah, so they call it an impervious surface limit
Mhm.
here. That was pretty standard. So a lot of municipalities, in addition to you have to sink an inch of water, which is based on the plot size, the whole landscape size.
Okay.
A lot of municipalities also have an impervious surface limit. So only X percentage of your lot can be covered by impervious surface, meaning structures or driveways. And some of them are more intense about others or than others around what they count as an impervious surface. To the point of like not common sense sometimes. we had a client one time in a city that we did that is massive house on a small lot. You know, he was it was a new build with the house and the driveway. They were like almost at the impervious surface limit for the landscape. And they had all zoysia lawn. So they were irrigating the rest of the landscape, constantly. And we did a project where we captured all of the rainwater into about 4,000 gallons worth of cisterns. And then we had those overflow through a series of rain gardens. So he didn't have to pull any irrigation for the lawn or any of the gardens from city water. After that, he was using all of his rainwater, which also is beneficial because then the tanks are draining, which means they actually have the capacity to hold more water the next rain, because the water is being used for irrigation. And then years later, he went back to the city. He had to get a permit because he wanted to put in a generator, which is like a tiny footprint, really, 5 by 5 or something. And they said, oh, you can't do it. You're at your impervious surface limit. You have to remove one of your rain tanks in order to get the permit to put in the generator. And I was just like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, the rain tank is actually significantly helping with the water issue that the neighborhood or the city is experiencing. So that was sort of like can't see the forest for the trees kind of situation. But most of the time, I think the limits are more reasonable than that. So.
Yeah, because that was also a really big challenge too in these smaller sites, is like, how do you manage when the site is basically mostly impervious? And do you
Right.
have tricks for that you generally use?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot. So for instance, in our green space that's adjacent to our office, it's part of our building. The landlord, when we moved in, it used to be an old chemical cleaning chemical company, and it was kind of an industrial space. And now it's art studios and offices and things, really beautiful. But the green space was like a, asphalt over top of gravel, an old road for bringing up the big trucks to one of the bays. They had all these garage doors adjacent to the green space. So it was just super compacted. The only things that were really thriving there were like the mulberries and the kudzu and greenbrier and some things. And pretty quickly, we started just removing all of the asphalt. So, I think removing what you can for remediating water or, managing water goes a long way. And then even decompacting is like that space, even when the non-asphalt parts, it was so compacted from just like washout over and over and over again. It had no topsoil. That it acts like an impervious surface. And even, I mean, the runoff coefficient of turf grass that's mown under 3 inches is like 85%, meaning 85% of the water that hits grass or lawn in most instances is going to run off. So it might as well be an impervious surface in and of itself, So with that project, with the green space project, we ended up taking out slowly all of the gravel and all of the asphalt, and then we tilled it up and added compost, and then we overseeded it with a native meadow mix, and then we reseeded it again, and now it's this, and we did a lot of earthworks to slow the water down because it had a 20,000 square foot building and a 10,000 square foot building, draining to this one probably half acre area. And most of it was just running off and causing major stormwater issues down in the intersection below. So we started by just sinking the water in, taking up what was impervious, sinking the water in, and then started filling it with all kinds of plants that we had in our nursery backstock and that we salvaged from clients' houses or, whatever, all the rain gardens, and then kept seeding it. And now the meadow is like, in peak summer, like 8 foot tall, some of it, with just buzzing with so many things. And it's filled with fruit trees and medicine and, pollinator plants. And as soon as we did that, the insects come in, and then the birds come in because they have some shelter, and then the hawks come in because they start seeing all the little bluebirds and the songbirds, the wrens and things bumming around. And it's just amazing how much just like sinking the water in and taking out the impervious surface does for just like kickstarting the ecology. So I think, back to your question, there are ways that you can work with small amounts of land to sink in water. It just means the size of your earthworks needs to they need to be deeper. You need to make sure you're using, in those instances where we're managing a lot of water in a very little amount of space, we might do deeper infiltration areas with gravel, because gravel, 57 gravel has about a 75% void space, meaning if you filled a jar or a bucket with gravel and then you filled it with water, about 75% of the volume of the bucket would be filled with water and the other 25% with gravel, versus like an engineered soil, which is a blend of compost and sand, which is pervious, but it's the growing medium for plants in rain gardens and things. But that only has about a 25% void space. And so we might change the balance. We might have a lot more gravel so we can infiltrate more, and they might be deeper earthworks than with a little bit less of the engineered soil on top, maybe like a 6 inches instead of 8 inches, and then choosing plants accordingly. But yeah, you can definitely tweak.
Do you ever use sand as a filter?
Not really. We don't do a ton of filtration. Most of our systems, what we do is we take downspouts, and we might run them into like a leaf eater or debris filter that has a leaf filter, and then a mosquito larva filter, and then it goes into a sealed pipe, and then those would go into a tank, and then the tank would overflow into a series of rain gardens. Potentially, it could overflow to a number of different types of earthworks, but mostly we use sand just for the earthworks, like growing medium, and not a lot of filtration.
Got you. Yeah, that was one of the tricks that I learned way back as super beneficial for, especially like in your situation where you're using that 3/4, 7/8, 1 inch gravel. Is put a layer of sand over the top of it so that the organic matter doesn't ever work its way into the gravel. Like French drains, right? They're notorious for working for about 5 years, and then they've bung up with organic matter and you can't use them anymore.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I started employing, like I worked for a golf course that was struggling with their groundwater management, and they would constantly dig holes, wrap perforated pipe in fabric, and sink it down in there with the gravel, and then they put their topsoil and plant their sod on top of it, and then they daylight the pipe. And I was like, well, first of all, most of these are failing due to the squirrels getting in there and building nests, right? And so you really need to put a cage over the pipe when it daylights. I go, but to be honest with you, you can avoid all of this headache if you just fill that trench with sand and then put your sod right over the top of it. And they're like, no, that never work. The sod will die. And I said, no, because I'm going to spray it with a compost extract, and I'm going to turn that sand into chocolate sand, and your roots are going to go right down into it, and you're never going to have the swampy part of the golf course. What is it? The main part.
The green.
No, not the greens. The distance from the tee. Fairway. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not a big golfer, so
yeah. Well,
it's lost on me.
Thanks. So you wouldn't get this part of the fairway where all of a sudden you were squishing and squashing to get from the tee to the green, and so that was another great trick that I'd learned along the way, and really helps a lot, especially in those types of situations where you want to get water to move from this place to that place without erosion, without pipes, without expensive infiltrators or anything like that. So hopefully that else you can use in your book of tricks.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we talked about water. Let's talk about herb plants. Like, do you plant herb gardens, or do you do, sacred geometry planting, or any?
Yeah, we do herb gardens. It really depends on the goals of the client, I think. Herbs are wonderful because they also, in addition to culinary and medicinal uses, a lot of them help with pest deterring, because of the volatile organic compounds in the leaves. So things like rosemary and mints and thyme and oregano and fennel. I mean, we use a lot of different aromatic plants because they also have the benefit of helping with the mosquitoes and all the other little critters that are a little nuisance, or what's the
Lighters,
word? Nuisances. Yeah,
the
they're
bite.
the biters, the ones that you don't want crawling on you or biting you. Um, yeah, so we do some herb gardens. It really depends. Most of the time we're interplanting. We're choosing plant palettes that kind of serve a lot of different functions within the landscape simultaneously. So in the book, I talk about, I think there's 13 functions of plants within the landscape that I've identified or kind of parsed out. It can be everything from beauty to privacy to, dynamic accumulation of nutrients from the soil into the leaves, deeper taprooted plants, or nitrogen fixing, or aromatic pest confusers, like we were just talking about, or, you know, songbird habitat or pollinator habitat or nectaries or beneficial insect attractants. There's like so many different functions that a plant can have within a landscape. And an ideal, when we're building plant palettes, we're often thinking about how can we fill this function or this need, say it's a privacy screen that a client wants. They live on a busy street and their backyard is adjacent to the road or something. So we might plant a privacy screen that's, it's going to be evergreen. Pineapple guava is one that we use constantly, which you can do a guild of pineapple guava with alpine strawberry, which is a shade loving strawberry beneath it. And then it's growing food. It's has an amazing, like, beautiful flower, pineapple guava flowers. Or feijoa. They're sort of like a light pink with this starburst, like bright red in the center. So they're gorgeous. And they're evergreen. So you're going to have the seasonal interest, and then they have like, 3-season, 4-season interest. So an example like that, where you might have, a plant that is serving, it's checking a lot of boxes. One plant is doing a lot of work. And then if you start doing that with every plant, then all of a sudden you have a landscape that is just really resilient and really robust and serves a lot of functions within your yard.
Good for you. I'm so glad that we met you and you came on the podcast, because
Well,
this
thanks
is
for
the kind of
having me.
inspiration that I love for people to hear. That, yeah, you don't have to look at it like, oh, I just want a pretty tree. Like, well, there's so many things that you can pick. It's,
Mhm.
you should be like, a little bit more conscious about what you choose, not just because it looks good, but because it is doing 13 other different functions. So,
Mhm.
and hopefully that you're talking about this will inspire people to take the time to maybe look a little bit closer, because there's a lot of times there is something similar that you could use that would bring added benefits in, that you didn't stop to think about before you just bought it, like, on the
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
again, trying to compliment you without making it look too 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 bad.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's the accumulation of knowledge through making a lot of mistakes, I would say, and having something that's really kind of big and theory heavy, and you're like, how can we make this so that anybody can do this? How can we make it so that you can just step outside into your yard and know that you're making some good choices? Uh,
Never
yeah.
mistakes, only lessons.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Leighton. This
Yeah,
has been a
yeah,
really wonderful conversation.
yeah, and I'd love to have you come back on with some pictures of your work next time. Like, I
Awesome.
yeah, I just was like trying to get into your head to understand, like, well, are you a purely suburban, or are you as far as into the city? And then you told me you have a 1,000-acre farm. I mean, this is no joke. I mean, you're all over the place.
Yeah, trying. We'll see. I'll have the publisher reach out if they didn't already and send you a copy of the book. It's got a ton of pictures.
Oh, please do,
Um,
please do it. We
yeah,
haven't
sorry
we
we didn't get
haven't
that in your
seen
hands beforehand.
we haven't seen your website here. Did you give it to
Okay.
Ken?
I did. It's
Here,
shadesofgreenpermaculture.com. Yep, there it
there you
is. And then our
go.
Instagram, if you want to follow us there, it's Shades of Green Permaculture. Yep, with all the little whatever those are called,
Underscores.
underscores. Yeah, those things.
Yeah, those
Um,
those things.
yeah. Yeah, so definitely follow. And if you want to pre-order the book, we're running a special, I think, right now where I'll write a handwritten note and send it to y'all. So if you won't have the book in time for holidays because it doesn't come out until January 20th, but I'll write you a little card to put if you want to
There you
share the
go.
love with family. So
They can use that as a gift. You give them
exactly. And like,
and
book
say this.
coming soon.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
There you go. I love it.
Exactly.
And again,
Awesome.
I love the approach. The more dialed in, like just focus on these three things, not this insane amount of information and studying, and
Hmm.
it has to be perfect type mentality. And that's the kind of breakthroughs that we need more of, and less of the campy stuff, and more of the, hey,
Hmm.
take what you can learn and use it, and the stuff that doesn't apply, just let it go. So
Yeah, you don't have to do all of it, you
no,
know?
no, that's
In
the
fact, you
beauty,
probably shouldn't. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Sometimes less is more.
Exactly, exactly. I remember when I first started, I was like, "I've gotta build guilds around every plant that I plant," and then the first farm that I did, I was just like I was also, maintaining it in the few seasons afterwards, and I was just like, "This is friggin' chaos." Like, I know plants, and I don't even, like, know what is happening here, it is so overwhelming, and then pretty quickly, I was like, "I'm just gonna simplify." Like, let's think of your landscape, your whole site as a guild, you know? How can we start to introduce these functions in across the site so you're having them and not necessarily have 20 different plants at every fruit tree?
Yep,
Um, yeah, so it's those kinds of things that teach you how to do it a little bit easier. Like simplify, simplify, simplify.
agreed, 100%. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, too, nature's going to provide her own inputs, and she may
Yep.
tell you that she doesn't like this plant here, or
Yep.
maybe the plant's going to die from natural selection. That's the other thing that
Yeah.
people, they think, oh my God, I killed the plant. Well, maybe that plant was not supposed to survive, and that's why it got attacked by bugs. There are cases that I
Mhm.
see, even in all natural systems, that plants die, and
Mhm.
it's not
Just like
nature
people
selection.
and
Yeah.
yeah, all the things. Yeah. It's just part of the cycle. We just gotta roll with the punches.
Hmm.
It's a
Yep.
dynamic system. Everything's changing. So
Yeah, that too.
yeah,
Right?
totally. Just gotta roll with it. I'll
Yeah.
roll with it.
So typically, right around now, we take questions from the audience. So we get Ken back
Okay,
on, and
cool.
he's going to ask you some questions. You've got 5 of them here, so nothing too
Okay, great.
crazy, but they often lead to further conversation. So welcome back, Ken.
Hey, Ken.
It's good to be back. Brandy, amazing story, and what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. We really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thanks so much
So,
for having me.
well, and like Leighton says, we're gonna have to have you come back on and get some pictures. Pictures speak 1,000 words, right?
Hmm.
And video clips too. Like we
Yep.
love short videos, so
Awesome.
feel free to go wild.
Okay. You don't have to ask me twice.
Okay, we'll have to get that arranged in on the back end here. So, but anyway,
Awesome.
Farmer Cheryl, how would Brandy approach composting for those who live in apartments and those in urban settings with no yards?
That's a great question. I was just experimenting with this very thing. I bought recently a Vigo composter that sits on your countertop. and it has like a very low temperature churning, and it kind of pre-digests the food and dehydrates it very slowly a little bit, so you're not really affecting the microbiome too much. But then you can take that, it takes a whole jar of compost, my food scraps from my kitchen, and sinks it down. The whole thing, well, it's about a gallon, I would say, sinks down to maybe like a cup or two of finely ground. It almost looks like coffee grounds when it's done. And it's dry. And then I've been taking that outside and just putting it around the trees in the forest next to my yard and just kind of seeing what happens, just kind of experimenting with it. Or you could put it in your potted plants and let it kind of decompose, add a little bit, some leaves on top or something. So I think that if you're in an apartment complex, that could be a great way to go about it. Also, there are a lot of services popping up. I know we have a couple here in Atlanta, and I know that they're popular on the West Coast, but they're like curbside composting. Um, so you can, like the one here in Atlanta is called Compost Now, and they're regional. They're around the Southeast, but you get a bucket. They give you a bucket, and then every week you fill your bucket with your scraps, and then you set it out just like you do your trash, and then they take it and they compost it at their facilities. And then in the spring, subscribers get like a bag of finished compost to use. So you could look into something like that in your area as well.
Have you ever done bokashi composting?
I haven't, but something I've wanted. I bought some microbes for it years ago and then never ended up doing it. I had a daughter instead.
Creating more compost.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is a trick that really helps a lot. You really don't need microbes for this, and it's basically called a trash pickle. And one of my colleagues basically created it as usually inventions happen out of necessity. He was in charge of a compost project in New York City, in Harlem, downtown, and you can't leave food out because of the rats and the pigeons and people complaining because everyone lives all right. It's a vacant lot, so you've got people all around it, and he'd have people bring in tons of stuff on Friday afternoon at like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's like, "What? How am I going to deal with this? I can't leave it out. It's going to rot and stink over the weekend." And so he just basically took it all and threw it into one of those big toters and took some wire mesh, put it on top, filled it with water, put some wire mesh on top of it, put some bricks on that to hold everything underwater, and then he let it sit for the weekend. And this isn't summer, so it was hot, right? And then he'd come back on Monday mornings and he'd pull the bricks and the wire mesh out, and he'd pour the liquid onto the compost piles. And the results he was getting were insane. Like he had protozoa, nematodes, fungi everywhere within like 3 to 4 days. So for whatever reason, that fermentation or pickling, because it really is kind of pickling, really helps to break out those enzymes and the nutrients, and over a 48-hour period, right? And then there was no smell to it. Like there was a funky, what we call a pellicle. I mean, you've drinking kombucha, right? And the mother that's on the top of the kombucha, so it would have a pellicle on the top of it, which is people kind of go, "Oh, that's all slimy." You kind of got to get over that. And
it caps it though too. So
yes, so there's no odor that comes out, right?
Yeah,
and it has that infiltration of air or gas exchange, so it lets the CO2 out that's coming from the fermentation and allows fresh air to come in to feed the microbes that are doing all the work just underneath the mother. So I mean, it's a great system for that type of situation, and it might even be beneficial for some of those like companies that do pick up the compost, because especially like in summer, I'm sure it's probably a little bit stinky by the end of the week.
Yeah.
And this might be a good way to mitigate the odor for not only the employees that are picking it up, but for the people that are storing it for the week.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get on to the next question here. In rain harvesting systems and in general, how can one avoid plastics and microplastics?
That's a great question. Depending on the size of the rain harvesting system, there are definitely metal options. Um, and then there's like ferrous cement if you wanted to make some tanks that way. But when it comes to the plumbing, unfortunately, there's not a lot of option that's practical for plumbing that's not made of some sort of plastic. But you can have your downspouts, you could use metal downspouts. If you're trying to get them into a tank, there's probably going to be some amount of a plastic component because of the way the plumbing is configured and the type of material that you would need. But you could bypass a tank or do um, run it so that if it's very far down the hill potentially and you were pumping, but you could just take your downspouts, which are metal, and run them into creek beds of sorts. So you have sort of riprap channels where you can direct the water to where you want it to go and then do earthworks, once you get it far enough away from the house. So we've definitely had clients that want to go that direction because of plastics and microplastics. But generally with PVC, it's a very stable material if you protect it from UV. So any that we have that's above ground, we paint them so that they're protected and keep them painted as part of an ongoing maintenance. And then once it goes below ground and it's buried, you don't have to worry about the degradation at that point.
Okay.
That's great suggestions. Have you ever seen those chains that act as
Rain
right?
chains.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one at my
those
house.
things.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're beautiful.
it's so
Yeah, and then you
cool.
can have that go into like a basin of some sort, and then that can overflow. So you get creative. I think once you understand the principles of water, you can kind of dance it around, you know.
Well, they're amazing. It's amazing to see how water will follow it down.
Mm-hmm.
Even in heavy,
Yeah, they're so cool.
yeah, even in heavy rain, it's just for whatever reason, the physics or hydrodynamics of water is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is.
Okay, we'll jump to another question here. What other permaculture techniques have you adapted for the urban setting?
I would say if there's a technique out there, we've probably done it. You can do a lot in a small amount of space. So Um, if you're talking about water, you could do contoured swales, you can do rain gardens, you can do rainwater harvesting systems, you can do gravity fed irrigation systems, um, a whole number of things. When we're talking about soil, whether it's chopping and dropping or lasagna gardening or double digging or sheet mulching, we do all of those in our systems. And then in terms of planting, you can grow a ton, like we've been talking about. So you can grow so much food in a small area. I talk a lot in the book about just the different growing styles that you can do if you're trying to grow more vegetables and fruits, for annual production. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do hugel beds and grow, or you could do raised beds, or you could do interplanting in your planting areas, in your flower beds even. There's pros and cons to all of them depending on what your goal is. So I think any technique you can adopt to an urban setting, with the exception of maybe keyline design. You kind of need more space for that.
Love it.
And like we say, the more the better. And you guys were talking about the cliques of the different regenerative people, and that's where we want to avoid that because you can use them all. So guys, just to let you know, we're going to be running the chorus shortly. Or the giveaway for the chorus shortly. So #biology in the live chat, and you'll get your chance to win Leighton's composting chorus.
Awesome.
If I can get my mouse to work again here, it froze up. Okay, the next question. What do you mean and how do you detox a tree before transplant? I think this is more for you, Leighton.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a tool called an injector. It's like a long metal spike, and it has a trigger and a handle on the end of it. And you plug that into your composting pump. I have a dual diaphragm pump because I don't want to kill the biology. And so basically I take the tree and I just stab it a bunch of times in the root ball, and keep applying compost extract. Typically, like, I'll do a flush first. So I'll use some water to just hydrate the plant, because often, when they've been transported from who knows where all over the country, they get dried out. So the first thing is to get them hydrated or hydrophilic enough so that they can accept the biology. And then you just repeatedly stab the tree over and over again with a really high grade compost extract that you've microscoped so it's good. And then you're off to the races. You do it a couple of times, and do it until it leaks out the bottom, so that you've thoroughly hydrated the ball. And then now that you're building plant defenses, and within a week or two, when you plant it, a week or two later, you've detoxed it. You've gotten rid of all of the synthetic fertilizers, and it's strong enough now that it's not going to go into plant shock when you put it into its new environment, because of the biology.
Mhm.
All about the
Mhm.
biology. And
Exactly. And the more biodiverse you have, the better off you are. And Leighton, you've already built the soil, filled it up with biology, then you're filling the tree ball with biology, or the root ball, and they're just going to mesh up as soon as you plant that plant into the ground. And no, it's not going to have any shock, because it's just, working right into the system right away.
I call it plugging it into the system.
Yes.
Literally plugging it in.
Yep.
So Shawnee, she wants to know, do you work with cities to build food forests for the public?
Yeah, definitely. So we worked some on the Browns Mill Food Forest project. We didn't do the planting or the design, but we did some water system design for that one. And that is a really cool public food forest here in Atlanta. And then we work with a nonprofit. We worked with several nonprofits that work with food equity and food access to do public green spaces that grow food. So we're currently working on a project with an organization and the Atlanta Housing Authority to do a farm-based, affordable housing community with Atlanta Housing Authority. So the center is this organization called the Foodwell Alliance. That has a funded farm with tons and tons of programming, space for residents to grow food for free, lots of programming, and just really beautiful learning opportunities. And then, there's all of the housing, multi-generational housing around the farm. And then a public food forest that kind of goes back into the woods with a little walking trail down by the river. So that's been really beautiful. And then we've worked a lot with cities to do productive urban landscapes. So we worked with a city in the area called the City of Clarkston to put in 3 public food forests and parks and the right-of-ways when they were doing a big DOT project. So took up the just sort of like dead strip of death and planted it with tons and tons of fruit trees and herbs and all kinds of things and flowers that can take those kinds of harsh conditions in between the sidewalk and the road. So yeah, in a lot of different ways, we've done some public food forest work. So there are a lot of nonprofits that are working in that arena here.
Amazing, Brandy. Just amazing.
Yep.
Keep up the good work.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm so happy to see that people are doing this. It just warms my heart.
Yeah.
So Dirt Right, closing loops is the path to regeneration. Do you know if it's safe to reuse the water from our dehumidifiers to feed plants?
I don't know why it wouldn't be safe unless there were some sort of mold spores or something that you were worried about. But I use my dehumidifier. I have a basement and a really wet climate. So like most Atlantans, I've got a dehumidifier down there during the summer. And I feed it to my plants. Mostly they're outside on my porch, so I've never really thought about them if there's like mold or anything. But Leighton, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's quite a few indoor cannabis growers that do recycle their water. I believe
They-
most of them often remineralize it, so they add in a little bit of calcium and potassium, so that it's not going to strip any or tie up any minerals that are in the soil. And you know, cannabis guys they're very particular about their plants. So
Very. Yeah.
yeah. They take
Ken's
it.
like, yes.
They take it to the next level. I don't think you all have to do that. I think that the water's just fine without minerals, especially if you have healthy plants and a healthy soil biome.
It's just a lot like using reverse osmosis water. You are stripping everything out of it. So yes, remineralization of your dehu water is something that you really want to do, and that can be as simple as a pinch of sea salt to get those minerals back in. Remember, it's not macro, it's micro. And your plants don't need those macronutrients. It doesn't need the full rock. It just needs little portions, little molecules of the rock. So you do want to remineralize that water if you can. And I know that from experience because I have used that all throughout my grows.
Awesome.
So Brandy's book specific to her gardening zone, or is it useful for all zones? Because Brandy, that's my wife, and we live in northern Canada, so that's why she wants to know.
Yeah, it's absolutely useful for any zone. So these are the 3 pillars. I go deep into the 3 pillars of a regenerative landscape, and how you work with water, for instance, in northern Canada might look a little different. You're obviously going to bury your pipes if you use them much deeper than we would in Georgia because of your frost lines, for instance. But the principles of how to work with water and slow it down and sink it in are going to translate across climates. The principles of building organic material in your soil, regardless of your climate, that's going to be of benefit whether you're in the arid Southwest or you're in the tundra or you're in the swamp. Building the ability of your landscape. I say the swamp, Georgia. Building the ability of your landscape to hold moisture, creating that sponge so that we are mitigating those drought and flood kind of continuums that we see. And then plants, the plant palette obviously is going to look very different in northern Canada than it does in the southeast of the United States or the Southwest. But how to go about crafting a plant palette and thinking about the uses of plants within your landscape, those are things that are going to translate regardless of your client or your climate. And the book's actually being published in, I think they have 38 different imprint languages that they publish in. So it's specifically written so that it can translate, metric and imperial system and apply to any landscape zone.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and you guys in the States are the only ones on imperial. The rest of the world is in metric.
I know, exactly. So the publisher have very strong standards about, okay, you can put things in gallons and such, but you always have to have a metric translation there. So
yeah,
that's really cool that they had you do that many languages as well. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool. Even like doing the illustrations and everything, like all of the label files are separated so that the labels can be translated in every language that they printed in. Everything's metric and imperial, so it translates. Everything is based on the botanical name, not the common names for that reason. All the things.
Well,
so yes, it's absolutely applicable to any climate.
Fantastic. And Leighton, Jeffrey wants to know, has Leighton written any books?
No, Leighton's not a writer. Leighton's a talker. I'm a gum flapper. That's why I do this stuff. I've been podcasting for, God, what has it been, Ken? 8 years now or something crazy?
Yeah, at least that, I think.
So this is how I write books.
Awesome.
And I'm having a problem writing because I said I was going to write one on It's All About the Biology, but I'm the same as you, Leighton. It's really hard to put it down in print. It's so much easier just to talk about it.
Yeah, because your
Mhm.
brain is going so fast that you literally can't get one word written down because you've already gone to 15 different places. And
Right.
it's like it's almost frustrating because I get mad because I'm like, what I
Yeah.
go back and read after had nothing to do with what I was trying to say because I was scatterbrained or thinking too fast. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how the writers can do it. I used to write poetry, no problem, but writing a book, it's
Uh-huh.
like, what?
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, it was and it was, I think it was a gift because I had, I taught 14 permaculture design certification courses. So I had all of this curriculum and all of these lectures written out already. And then in 2019, built our online course called the Regenerative Backyard Blueprint. And that has, 45 different lectures as part of it. And they were all written out for, I wrote them all as scripts so that I could record them and everything. So it really just came down to, let me organize this into an outline that kind of makes sense. And I have all the material, written out in lecture form, lots of different places. So then it's just a matter of like rewriting it and putting it where, so it all is a contiguous thought
Brandy,
instead of.
that's cheating. Okay, I swear
I
that's
know,
cheating.
total cheating. I was like, let me just write a book about what I've been teaching about for 20 years.
well, hey, that's not cheating because you wrote it down at the first place, right? You
Right,
still had to
right,
be a writer. You still had to be a
right.
writer. You never would have been able to write those curriculums.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
no, that's not cheating. That's being smart about all
It's
of
iterating.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And hey, iteration is the most valuable. It's more valuable than invention, right? A
Mhm,
good idea is an invention, but an iteration
mhm,
of that good idea is taking it further down the road. So
mhm.
kudos to you.
Well,
And
thank you.
Leighton's just not going to let me give you a hard time, Brandy.
It's okay, I can take it. I come from a family of shit talkers. So, yeah. It's my
So
love
we'll just,
language.
yep. We'll jump to our next question here.
All right.
What if you pour labs on your compost or slurry or ferments?
So labs are lacto acid bacteria. So
Yep.
those
Okay.
they prevent odor. Is typically what they're known for, but they also have a lot of other beneficial qualities. They're used in EM or EM1 because they're part of that trilogy of organisms that all live off each other's waste and create a harmonic environment or symbiotic environment. So that labs definitely have a benefit in fermenting or making a food pickle. And I don't think that in your landscaping you need specifically labs. Although if you do deal with
Uh-huh.
certain pests, labs can be beneficial as a foliar spray in lieu of an
Mhm,
insecticide. So
mhm,
yeah, it's one of those really cool bacteria that has a lot of like you guys like you talk about your 13 different benefits of this one plant. Well, labs is
mhm,
similar. A lot of different benefits for both
mhm,
plants as well as fermenting.
mhm. That makes a lot of sense. We make a lot of compost tea and use that as a spray through the landscape. And we also do a lot of like comfrey teas and things more for
We
foliar sprays. Yeah,
comfrey.
weed teas. Yeah.
Oh God, you just take it to another level right
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Because,
we can take next conversation. We'll talk about that.
that's what I'm talking about. Pictures, and we talk about different types of teas and the benefits they make or have.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Well, I'm glad we
And
started the questions early there, Ken. I mean, they
Yeah.
kept piling on as we were answering. So
and that's always the way because people go, "Oh, it's question period. Oh, I better get my question in." So right now we've only got this one left, and that's: does the city keep up with those forests with biological treatments?
Yeah, The Browns Mill Food Forest is managed by volunteers and local nonprofit that does, mostly or not all organic management. The city ones, they're not really doing, like the city streetscapes and things, they're not doing a lot of management, not spraying fertilizers or compost as far as I can tell. Things are just sort of, we did the management of them for the first couple of years and kind of jump started them, and now they are just kind of doing their thing in the right of ways, and don't need a ton of inputs. And then for the nonprofit I was talking about with the Atlanta Housing Authority, that's all managed by the nonprofit and it's certified organic. So they are definitely doing that.
Making
Yeah,
compost.
Great question.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I got out of the big monuments parks for cities and states, because it crushed me. Like we would get it to a point where it was singing, super healthy, 100% synthetic free, functioning at top level, and then we'd give them the keys to the park, for lack of better words, and hire a superintendent to take over and manage, cutting the grass, mow, blow, and go, all that stuff. And the first thing they do is turn back to synthetics. And then they'd be right back in the same situation 3 to 5 years later, where they couldn't get grass to grow in front of the goalies' nets. Every time they had a movie night, the field got destroyed. And it's just so sad to see that, especially after you put your heart and soul into it. Again, that's why I moved away from those big, huge projects. I mean, I loved feeling of being regenerative and really putting people into these beautiful green spaces where you knew that it was synthetic free and that it would function at a high level. And then you felt heartbroken when you'd go back 5 years later and it looked like it did before the renovation started. So anyway,
right.
Yeah. So at least you probably don't see a lot of that in your world, because I'm sure your clients say, okay, I'm going to follow what your lead is, so that I do the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, if they're investing in it, they definitely want it to thrive. They've hired us because they want an expert involved, for sure.
So we do have a question on whereabouts in Atlanta are you, and rainwater mixed with dehu water, and that's actually a very good idea. So where are you around Atlanta?
Where our offices are located in Avondale Estates, which is just east of Decatur, inside the perimeter. If you're an ATLian.
Well, they say they come down to Kenshaw areas sometimes. So
awesome.
So basically, the perimeter is what, a highway that goes around the outside of it, like a bypass.
285. It's like a big circle, and everything is ITP or OTP, inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter. The big reference point in Atlanta.
I think that's most cities have that nowadays.
Yeah, that's interesting. In town or the burbs,
Yep. So Leighton Jeffries says you should write a book of short stories based on your experiences.
Well, that might be easier to do than trying to write a book about how to. I'll think that's more like writing
poetry.
Yeah, and then you can just get a tape recorder and then upload it into some software and
Yep. There you go. What is it? Speaking with Dragon or whatever that was.
As one of them. Yep. So let's go to the contest. Brandy, don't run away. But I like to do the contest, guys. So if you haven't put in #biology, you're going to miss out on this one. You'll have to join us next Monday, but we're going to start this one right now. And next Monday, we have Cass Gilmore with his cranberry farm coming on to give us some updates. And Lucas,
congratulations, Lucas!
You just won, Lucas. Brother.
Oh wow, he was hoping.
And
he's that's cool.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I spoke to Perky today, and he's finally geared up to land his dome in a friend's place, and then he's also gotten a lot more content put together on the website. So when you get access to his website, he will be having some free content for you guys to also move into the health and well-being side of it. This is something, Brandy, that this kid's I love him to death. He was one of his older brother was in my oldest daughter's kind of like circle of friends. And so Perky would tag along with his brother when they were coming over to my house to, hang out together. And Perky and I just sitting on the back porch and just chop it up. He was just so interested in all this stuff. And then he followed me down to Rodale, Meadow Lane, and working basically for free. And then he started a whole training regimen about training without destroying your body. And then he got into body, spirit, and he's really closed the whole loop on human health, exercise, generation of energy through music and dance. So, yeah, when he comes on, he said he'd probably be ready in about a month, Ken. And I'd love you if you tuned in, or we'll send you a link to it, because
please do.
This is one of those kids that if you to the right people in your circle, you give them his name and say, hey, just kind of go check this guy out, because he really is the real deal on creating that closed loop on health, food, soil, and mind and body.
I love it. That's awesome.
We're going to do
thank you.
one more comment here. And Lucas says, I'm going to put that compost on my beard if I win, so I can catch up to Leighton.
Get the good microbiome. I read something that men with beards have better immune systems because they're exposed to a little bit more, going on.
I think I'm very much am a modern day kind of pig pen, because I'm playing with compost all the time, and my fingernails are always dirty unless I take the time to really clean them, which I do.
Takes time.
Periodically. But I'm always dirty, but it's all good soil. It's not bad soil.
I love it.
Full of biology.
If you think about it, underneath your fingernails is a slow release system to your whole body.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Good way to think about it.
Yep.
So Lucas, send me an email at it'sallaboutthebiology@gmail.com, and I will hook you up with Perky to get the chorus. And I will be adding, if people want to buy the chorus, I'll be adding into the description the link for the chorus where you can go and buy it as well. Brandy, thank you so much for coming. Stick around after we go off the air. Leighton, as always, love you, brother. You bring such passion to this show.
Well, I appreciate
Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Ken, too, for all the hard work you do behind the scenes. Nobody really knows that you're diligently working away at this stuff so that we can have this weekly. Brandy, you're a blessing and a pleasure to have aboard, and can't wait to have you on to talk about this, these teas and these extracts and how beneficial they are, and also see some of the pictures of your work, because at the end of the day, that's really going to let me see your world, which is, I'm very excited, because, I've always been a creator. Like, I did a lot of drafting. I was a design build architect firm for years. And I loved getting behind my drafting table and just get going wild with what I potentially could do with a client's property or house or addition or whatever. And kind of miss those creative days. I do a little bit of inventing on the side now, but nothing is what I used to do. And so I really appreciate seeing your work. So again, thank you.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Yeah, thanks for the 2 hours. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next one.
Yep, likewise.
Okay, we're going to end the broadcast there. And guys, we'll see you on Wednesday with me and Andy. So don't forget to check that out.